and welcome to the fourth lesson in the course Moving Past the Basics. Today we'll be covering the first stage of the game, the opening. As you may already know, there are three stages: the opening, the middle game, and the endgame. In the opening, the first moves of the game are made, and these moves set the tone of the play. In the middle game, most of the strategizing and planning takes place, and the endgame requires rigorous calculation and knowledge of specific positions and plans. So let's review what we already know about the opening. We know three basic principles. We want to control the center, we want to develop our pieces, and we want to make sure our king is safe. And interestingly enough, almost all repeatable openings in chess are rooted in these same basic principles. So let's look at a few examples. The first type of opening we're going to look at is the king-pawn game. And these openings are characterized by the pawn in front of the king moving forward 2 spaces, and the pawn in front of the other king moving forward 2 spaces on the first move of the game. Now, the most famous king-pawn opening is known as the Ruy Lopez, or the Spanish game, and this opening has been studied since the 15th century, and it's still one of the most popular openings today. So, the idea of the Ruy Lopez is to develop this light squared bishop to b5, and then castle. So, let's revisit our basic principles. With his very first move, White has declared his intentions of fighting in the center. He played e4, he occupied a center square, e4, and he's attacking a center square, d5. So let's see how White continues. He plays knight f3, which is developing one of his pieces and attacking 2 squares in the center. Black replies with knight c6, which defends the e5 pawn, and also attacks d4. Now here's the characteristic move of the Spanish game, bishop b5, putting some pressure on the knight on c6, developing the bishop, and giving the king some area to castle. So the Ruy Lopez continues as follows. Black plays a6, chasing the bishop. He moves back. Black plays knight f6, he also playing to develop his pieces, and then White castles. So let's see what White has accomplished so far. He has made a stake in the center, he has developed his pieces, and his king is pretty safe, seeing that he has castled. So, what's White's plan for the middle game? Well, what he wants to do is he wants to finish developing the rest of his pieces, this knight on b1 and this bishop on c1, and he wants to try to make a stake in the center with moves like c3 and d4. And Black's plan, naturally, is going to be to try to hold his position in the center, perhaps by playing d6, and developing the rest of his pieces, perhaps after b5 kicking the bishop out, putting his bishop on b7 and his other bishop on e7, and of course, castling. And in general, king-pawn openings tend to lead to more open, tactical positions. Now, the next kind of opening I'm going to cover is something known as the queen-pawn game. And as you may guess from the name, it involves the pawn in front of the queen being moved forward 2 spaces, and the other pawn moving forward 2 spaces. And this is the starting position of a queen-pawn game. And the specific opening I'm going to cover is known as the Queen's Gambit Declined. So after d4, d5, White follows up with c4. Now, at first glance, this move looks rather curious. Can't Black just take White's pawn for free? And the answer is yes for the moment. However, the idea behind the Queen's Gambit is to remove one of Black's center pawns, or his pawn, on the d-file. Now what White can do is he can push his pawns at e4, or maybe even e3. And it's clear that White now has a larger stake in the center than Black, because he has 2 center pawns, whereas Black only has 1. In addition, Black's pawn on c4 is now rather quite vulnerable to White's bishop on f1, and White may be gaining back this pawn very shortly, and in addition to his center, he now has equal material. So let's look at the Queen's Gambit Declined, and Black can decline this gambit by playing e6, defending his pawn on d5. Now, the Queen's Gambit Decline gives White very easy development. He's going to develop his knights to c3 and f3, he's going to bring his bishop to g5, he's going to play e3, develop his light squared bishop, and castle, and have a very comfortable position to work with. So let's see how this happens. So let's say White plays knight c3 here. Black can reply with knight f6. White can play bishop g5, Black can play bishop e7. So both sides are developing their pieces here. Now white can continue simply with knight f3, and black can castle. So black has accomplished some things in the opening as well. He has a stake in the center, he has fair development, and he has king safety. What he has sacrificed, however, is a bit of space. He's a bit cramped. It will also be difficult for black to develop his light squared bishop, as it's locked in by its own pawns. So, to illustrate the basic principles of the opening, development, control of the center, and king safety, I'm going to play through a few more moves to show you how white completes his opening. So, black here can play a move like, say, c6. White will continue, play e3. Black can play knight b7, white can play bishop d3. Black can play rook e8, and white can castle. And here we're nearing the end of the opening. Both sides have stakes in the center, both sides have developed, and both sides have castled kings. Now, queen-pawn openings tend to lead to more semi-open positions that involve more strategic maneuvering, a topic covered in the next course. Now let's cover the final opening for this lesson, which is the Sicilian defense. And the Sicilian is the most popular opening in the world. It's played by amateurs and people who are competing for the World Championship. And the Sicilian is characterized by the moves e4, c5. Now, the reason why the Sicilian is so popular is because it offers excellent counter-attacking chances for black. By playing a lopsided opening and not replying, say, right with a king-pawn opening against white, black has very dynamic options. He wants to open up the c-file and attack along it and create some sort of imbalanced pawn structure where he can try to exploit his advantages over white's. Now, let me show you how the opening Sicilian arises. White plays knight f3, black plays d6 or e6 depending on the opening. White plays d4, black takes the pawn, white takes the pawn, and here we have the starting position of the open Sicilian. The most common variation is known as the Najdorf, and this was commonly played by Bobby Fischer and Garry Kasparov. Black plays knight f6, white plays knight c3, and then black plays a6, a very flexible move that leaves options open to other variations. I hope you enjoyed this cursory introduction to common openings. Thank you for watching this video. Good luck on the exercises.